Hi, I'm Mark Overly. I'm the coffee buyer for Kaladi Brothers Coffee here in Denver, Colorado, and today we're going to be doing a coffee cupping. We're actually going to be doing a couple of things. I'm going to be doing a coffee cupping with these folks right here, but at the same time I'll be doing a training our staff on how to go about doing a cupping. So it's both a cupping and a training for a cupping. Okay, so we have Lanny and Terry, not to be confused with Terry. Lanny, you're working at Lanny and Terry are working at coffee shops. You're working at the coffee shop, is that right?
Yeah.
And have you done a cupping before?
I have not.
Never done a tasting before? Terry?
No.
No? Okay, but now you've got coffee experience. How many years of coffee experience do you have?
Just 2 years.
Okay, all right.
Running an espresso truck.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And then Terry I've known for 100 years. I think this is you've done a wine tasting before.
Yeah, I've seen you do some cuppings.
Okay, great. And then, so has anyone done a wine tasting type of thing? Oh, this is perfect. How perfect. Okay, so the first thing we need to get done is to grind the coffee up. Now, what I've done, I've set the table up, and for those of y'all, the Kaladiites in the background, I've set the table up according to our board. All right, so I'm starting at the top of the board, and I'm going to work it away down to the bottom of the board. What I have decided to do in this case is I'm not listing the coffees by their country of origin. I'm going to list it by the cooperative, a designation that I know, but what I want to do at this point is a lot of people, when they see like Sumatra or Peru or something like that, they're going to have a fixation in their head like, oh, I like that coffee. So I want to try to kind of obscure some of that, right? Even though some of y'all might recognize some of the names, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, so let's grind some coffee. Normally, during the kind of grinding stage, it's a good time to kind of talk about, have something you want to talk about, either talking about origins of coffee, roasting, just something to kind of get people kind of loosened up. In my case, what I really want to focus on today is how we taste and how we talk about taste. That's really the big thing. And for years, I've been doing coffee cuppings with customers, and for about the first, I'd say 5 years, they were all largely unsuccessful. And I was kind of following the book as far as how one goes about doing a coffee cupping, and I found that it just didn't work. Yeah, you want to give me a little spit out there? Okay. Until we came about a way to actually talk about taste that made sense. And the reason for that, the reason why I think that when we're talking about cupping is unsuccessful is because we talk about it backwards. Usually, when you see someone talking about coffee, cupping coffee and such, they'll go right to aroma. And they'll start talking about how it smells, and they'll start describing smell. Usually, as they're grinding the coffee, they'll smell the coffee. They may make some comment about the smell of the coffee at that point, making some kind of judgment on that. And when we go to when we pour the water in, they'll talk about smelling the coffee again, and they'll almost directly get into the smell of coffee, which the smell of coffee is very important. Aroma makes up 80% of the aromatic volatiles that makes up the taste of coffee. So you would think that then that's what you want to talk about. But the problem with talking about aroma is that our memory of aroma is episodic, not semantic. And what I mean by that, if I say, think of the color red, I'm pretty sure that every one of you can immediately picture in your mind red. You do not have to go, red, red. I remember one time we were driving down the road and we came to a red light to stop. Red. Oh, that's red. That's an episodic memory where you have to piece together that definition, right? So if you say, remember the smell of apples, for example, you're like, apples. One time we were traveling around the country and we were out and we got this big barrel of apples. You could just smell the apples. Okay, that's the smell of apples. So if I were just to put this in front of you and say, smell this, it's that question is an absurd question because you are smelling this episode right now. And it's going to smell like coffee. Right? So what we have to do is develop a way that we can agree on taste terminology, because that's what a lot of what cupping is about, is taste terminology. Now, the person who taught me how to cup was a chemical engineer. And he was kind of a hardcore kind of guy, and he believed that the only people who could talk about cupping were other chemical engineers that had a grounding in chemical engineering, and you could, we all agreed that certain aldehydes smelled this way and certain ketones smelled that way. So we're not going to be that hardcore.